to some of those questions as we go. And now it looks like we're live on Facebook there. So I saw that little thing tick, pop up there. So I'm going to introduce Pastor Rick Dubose. I got to meet him, it was 20 years ago. It's crazy. 20 years ago when I was right out of college, was a lot dumber and made a lot more mistakes then. And he had me over his house a few times, and then we reconnected a few years ago, but he's known me a while and he's still talking to me, but he's had a few hats on throughout his career. Currently, he's elected the assistant general superintendent of the Assemblies of God at the 58th General Council in August of last year. He's a member of the executive leadership team, the deciding team members there at the top of Assemblies of God. Prior to his present position, he was the general treasurer of the Assemblies of God from 2017 to 2019. He served as superintendent of North Texas District, overseeing around 600 churches for about 10 years there in 07 to 17. And then he was assistant superintendent from 05 to 07. He pastored at Saxe Assemblies of God here in North Texas, one of our key Orphan Care churches even today, from 87 to 05. And prior to that, he served as a pastorate in Hallsville, Texas, and began his youth ministry career there in Mesquite, Texas. He's co-authored the book, The Church That Works. He and his wife, Rita, have 2 daughters, a son, and this is one of my favorite, 8 grand boys there, grandsons. So Pastor Rick, thanks for joining us here. We're so honored to have you.
It's good to be a part of it. To participate. I like what you've done, where you're going, who you've become. But I do remember when you didn't have gray in your beard or hair, and you've matured nicely. You've done well, so it's all right. You got quite a few kids in your house too, don't you?
Oh man, yeah. There's a little picture I think up there that if you feed them after midnight, they multiply. So I really would caution that. So
yeah, I get it. I remember that movie. Yeah.
Well, I remember, it was 8 years ago, Pastor, where God was pulling my wife and I, Trisha, into this crazy journey, leaving our church. We've been for 10 years to jump into this. And my pastor, John Lindell at the time, and then the U.S. missions director and my wife and I were all meeting, and they were commissioning us, and kind of helping us dream and plot where to go, where to start, equipping churches to foster and adopt. And they said, I think you should start in North Texas, the 13,000 Assemblies of God churches around the nation, Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. You could probably get to all of them right there. And that's a strong district. I want you to serve the Oaks while you're there and serve Pastor Rick Dubose. And so he said, you should give him a call. And I'm like, oh, you want me to call him? I was like, oh my gosh. And so I, called and was like, I don't know if you remember me, and probably made a lot of mistakes back then. So maybe I'm in good graces, and told you this crazy vision of helping churches do foster care and adoption. And I'll never forget your response. I think I was about to go on a run, a little 5K there. And you said, are you sitting down? And I was like, I can. And I literally sat down at my kitchen table and I said, what? He goes, well, we're about to launch a district-wide orphan care ministry. And I'm like, no, what? Are you serious? Like fostering, adopting, supporting, local, global? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he started to unpack it. I'll let you tell the story, but I want you to know the story was so exciting. And I hope the viewers today feel the excitement and the vision and the faith that you have inside of you for just life and God, and definitely for orphan care here, because that faith I received at that moment, I'm not kidding you, I ran one of my fastest 5Ks after you and I talked there. So tell the audience here, how did that start and what was going on?
Very good. Thank you, Eric. Well, it all started. I was superintendent, as you already said. We're at one of our district councils when one of our pastors brings this African-American brother up to me and said, I want you to meet Aaron Blake. And I said, well, hello, Brother Blake. He said, well, Aaron pastors a church, and he tells about where he pastors. He was filled with the Spirit, had quite an encounter, and we said, well, Aaron says, well, this is my 3rd year to visit your council, and we've just never met. I've been sitting at the back watching what God's doing in the district. And he said, I oversee a number of churches, just would love to have my guys participate and come in. He said, a matter of fact, would you come preach for me? I said, well, sure, let's do it. So we set it up. I went there, preached that Sunday. And before I preached, all these kids come up to do this kids choir. And I mean, it's like 30 something kids, and they're fun, and it was enjoyable. It was entertaining, if nothing else, while they're singing. He said, you know where these kids come from? I said, well, I guess their parents. No, not exactly. He said, all of these kids were in the foster system. And these families in this church have adopted them or brought them in. Some of them have been adopted. Others are still in the system. And because this whole church is into foster ministry, because I'm in foster ministry. So we're having this conversation just before I preach. He said, I want to talk to you more after you preach. So I preached. God was good. It was a great day. He takes me in his office. And in his office, everything in the office was about foster care. He had more letters from the governor than anybody I'd ever seen, more awards for what he had done. He sets me down, tells me these stories, moves my heart. And then he says, what would happen if the Assemblies of God were to embrace foster ministry? How many kids could be redeemed? And he said, I really want you to pray about that. I said, I don't need to pray about that. James has already declared that we must do it. The pure religion is that. I've just never known how to do it. If you know how to do it, if you'll help me, right, let's do it. And that's where it started. So he sends me to the state to meet the people in charge of social services and all that makes up. And I don't know, I thought they were always the enemy trying to steal everybody's kids. I had all this wrong feeling about them. I get down there and meet these great people. So the next year, 1 year later, back at district council, the lady, Audrey Deckinger, was over that for the state of Texas, actually agreed to be a speaker at a special breakfast at our district council. And here's what she said. She said, the reason this state is doing foster care is because the church is not fulfilling the call of Christ for its ministry. She's a good Presbyterian lady, blew us out of, just messed us up. And she said to us, she was the leader in those days. And she said, here's the deal. If you'll take over the ministry, I'll get out of your way. And that began the conversation and the process that ultimately then you would call a few months later and we would already be in the works. And that's kind of how it started for me.
Yeah. I remember walking when we moved down after that moment. It happened in June. We moved down in August. And I remember the quotes from all the pastors that were there that day. And God used the head of child welfare. She oversaw 9,000 employees. The head was at your district council there, your event over this network of churches. And what I remember the quote of all these pastors, she looked at us and she said, we the church we men. But we're in the role of, it was like, what? She said that? It was a true, the church has just not been getting involved in foster. He was there to help Bridget and get us all involved. So man, time there God used, and it was a big moment. And I think for all our viewers, I think that's something to capture right there. I think it's a moment where we realize it is good, it is strategic. God used big moments with Jesus when there were thousands of people gathered around to move the masses towards his agenda. And God did that in that moment with you. And I think that is a critical piece to when you're leading an organization into Orphan Care, you got to find the platform moments that are big moments to move the ball forward. It can't just be some silo ministry tucked over in the side and just kind of nobody knows about it. What I'm hearing right there is you push that thing all the way to the top so that it would be top level leaders moving down.
Good. That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Then it became the hard part. Yeah. We had to go to work. We had to figure out a system, people. It was a lot of work, but it was incredible. But you helped us so much with that piece. And you came in and started helping us structure, get the voice out, get the word out, connect to churches, develop a system, develop a plan. Because I saw quickly, based on everything they taught me at the state level, they said there's a whole lot of one and dones. A family gets in foster care, They go through one cycle. It's more difficult than they thought. They don't have the support they need, and then they don't do it again. They go through all the training, all the effort, and they do it one time. It's emotional. It's painful. It's disappointing sometimes, and they forget it's about the kid, and they let it become about how comfortable or uncomfortable it is for them. And without the support, they end up they don't do it again. They don't keep going. And she said, if we could figure out a way where the ones that are helping doing it keep doing it and stay engaged in the process, we could get this done. So that's where you came in, and you and Bishop Blake together began to develop a plan, which Bishop we kind of used his church model already, what he was already doing. That helped us. It's a good starting place of how do we train our churches to do this effectively so that it's not negative on the church, because you are bringing in kids with difficult stories and backgrounds and pain, and they don't know how to live in church and act and respond. We get that. They don't, sometimes they use a little language that our church kids haven't heard a lot of, because that's what they grow up in. It's where they are. So we wanted to make the church have a good experience. At the same time, we wanted to give good support to the families that are really on the front line in these kids. And that's what you did. You developed a support system and wraparound system and all that are in that process, and poured it out. And it began to really catch some good. You also, I don't know how much you're going to tell today, Eric, but you also developed, you and Bishop together, a relationship with all the foster care workers in our area, so that they begin to appreciate what you did. And they wanted kids to be connected to our churches because the families were better prepared to be effective. So they actually started coming to our office. You remember that? Hundreds of them would come, and we would train them on how to work with the local church. You did that.
Yeah, I'm hearing two things from that part of the story. One is, when you're getting your organization moving into orphan care, use what you got, and you had a facility, a beautiful facility, where churches around the nation, most of them have facilities. Some of them are church planners and they're working on it, but they would provide their facility to serve child welfare and to come with that humble spirit. It's like, we're not here just to take, we're here to give. And that spirit of generosity, where it's like, I remember so many meetings where state was coming in and using our facilities. And I hear other pastors around the nation using their facility. Something else I heard there, and I don't know if everybody caught the order right there, but we talked about the big moment. And then he said, then the hard work happened. Now, everybody knows that's what happens. Like, some people think you do the big moment and then you just step back and just go, wow, look what the Lord had. That's not always how it works. I mean, God does stuff, but he also likes to use us to move things forward right there. So you had the big moment, and now the hard work was going. But then you said we started writing the plan out. Okay, let's talk about that. So were the plans solidified at the beginning before we started?
How do you build something you've never seen?
Yeah.
So we didn't know what victory looked like, and we had no idea what success would feel like or smell like. We tried to learn from others, but what we were trying to do, we couldn't find anybody doing exactly that. So we really have to admit, we didn't know exactly what we were doing. So we built the plane as we flew, as they say. We did that. We clearly did that. The beauty now, though, is with all that experience, you come into a situation, it's not so scary. You've got a plan. This is first step, second step, third step. We didn't have those yet. Those came later. And we're just the kind of guys that were willing to do it without a plan. And God helped us, and it developed. So yeah, that's
I just think that's a great leadership point right there. Scripture tells us, though a man plans his ways in his heart, the Lord determines his steps. And I think it's good to have a plan. And sometimes the plan is a vision, right? It's an idea. It's like, man, wouldn't it be great if there was a day where there are more families waiting on children than children waiting on families? I mean, that's a vision and a plan. It's not all the step-by-step, elements of it. But you also we're called to walk by faith and not by sight.
That's right.
And we don't always know what the next step is, but the Bible says that his word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. And I always picture that as it's maybe that little light on the end of our phones. It's just enough to see maybe the next step, but not 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now.
That's exactly right. It's a principle of God. There's something happens when God puts something in your heart and he makes you the owner of the next thing he's going to do. He, when Peter declared, silver and gold have I none, but such as I have, that first have is a word that means access. I do not have access to silver and gold. The second thing was but such as I have is a word of ownership. It means this is what I own. And then he said, in the name of Jesus Christ, there's things God has made us owners of. I think there are people on this call would be my guess. It's not a prophetic word, but it'd be my guess that God is making you the owner of the next thing he's going to do for foster care. That's why you're here. You're listening, learning, wondering what's God saying. And he's making you the owner. You may would rather somebody else owned it and you supported them, but that's not what God's doing. He's making you the owner of what he's going to do. Once Peter owned it, he knew he owned it. Such as I have, such as I own, give I you. He declared it. He spoke it out. Until we begin to speak it, things don't begin to align. When something happens, when we begin to declare what God's made us owners of, people hear it and come and get alongside of us. People begin to support it. The money didn't come first. The declaration comes first. The structure didn't come first. The declaration came first. The support didn't, the people didn't come until the declaration. It begins to align. Something begins to happen even in the supernatural, I believe, when we begin to declare out loud what God's put in our heart. There's a divine shift that takes place. Then Peter reached in his strength, grabbed the man by his hand. With his hand, he grabbed the man. He began to work in his own power. He did what he could do in his own strength. Some of us wait for the miracle. Once we begin to line it up and declare it, then we wait for some miracle and we don't go ahead and start where we are. I believe there's a power at starting right where you are. We didn't know what we were doing in this and a lot of other things I've led. I didn't know when we started. I just knew, you know what, God wants to do this and I think we're the owner. And so we begin to reach out and take and start. Did we get it right every time? No. Did we come back later and laugh at the way we started? Yes. Did we learn so that we would do it better? Sure. But the reality is we started where we were. We put our hands in the middle of it. We reached down to that dirty old dusty man that had been laid there begging in the middle of the dust, and we got a hold of him and did what we could. Then there's that miracle. There's that thing that can't be explained except look what Jesus did. Peter would later declare to the crowd, why are you looking at us as though we did this? We didn't do this. Jesus Christ, whom you crucified, he did this. And so there's that part of the process. And so you're owning it. You've got to begin. You begin to do, you declare and you go to work. Are you going to mess up? Well, probably. If you don't, we're going to be embarrassed because we sure messed up a lot. And your advantage is there has been somebody lay some groundwork. With what Eric has done and his experience, not only in North Texas, but at this point, his experience around the nation, working with churches and districts and groups, he's already learned. He's already made some of the mistakes. We made some of them together. He's gathered. So you've got a starting place that we didn't have. So if God's making you the owner, don't be afraid to declare it and don't be afraid to start right where you are and see where you go from there.
Man, that is encouraging. I'm like, come on, let's heads bowed, eyes closed. Let's pass the offering bucket right here. pass the link, a donation link for everybody to click on. Right. I'm just kidding, Erica. Don't post a link. All right. So okay, yeah. You said so many good things right there, and it is true, Pastor. When we were transitioning out of the district office and 3 years ago now into Backyard Orphans, we just kind of looked over our shoulders and we're like, man, I didn't anticipate helping hundreds of churches through a district or network, right? That wasn't my plan. That was God's plan. And we just kind of looked over our shoulders and was like, you know what? We learned a lot of what not to do and some of what to do. And now our team, you're right, we have an entire process, not just for one church to get in and do a workshop and build what are you going to do? Who's going to do it? And do a launch Sunday where hundreds in our ministry, hundreds of kids a year come to, are going through families in these churches because of the one church at a time model. Now, with working with you, we have this network model. We're actually helping multiple networks from Cincinnati, Ohio to New England to Florida, to South Texas, Indiana, Oklahoma, Missouri, Texas. There's all these conversations going with these networks of churches where we're trying to help them to build an infrastructure and a plan and a process by faith, It's customized to their world. All those churches and all those districts networks are different, and we're trying to help them to build it where they're getting a department, that is now sitting at the table with their children's minister, their youth minister, and there's an orphan care director, because they all flow into each other. I remember when we were putting in that piece, we started realizing, wait, I think they all should sit at the table, on a monthly basis or something. And kids, we're talking about kids camp, right? And they were like, well, man, maybe we should try to help scholarship some kids who are from the foster care system in our churches to go to camp. And this is the beauty of the team of an entire organization working together. This is the beauty. The senior adult ministry director raised his hand and said, well, what if some of the senior adults, grandmas and grandpas, raise some money so that these kids in foster care could go to the children's camp? And so now you got 3 departments working together in unity and harmony to get kids to the gospel. Oh man, that was just one of my favorite moments, seeing that synergy and unity coming together.
Incredible. Incredible.
Yeah.
I think sometimes if I'm leading it and it's never been in my church before, my question is, how do I get people to want to do it? How do I stir up a passion?
Good.
Desire? What do I do? For me, they took me and set me down at a lunch table with some key people that I didn't know who they were. And we all had this introduce yourself moment. It was at the Capitol building there in Austin, Texas. First guy says, well, I'm the director of prisons. I said, well, that's a pretty cool job. How many inmates do you have? We started having this conversation. It's pretty good. After a while, he leads the conversation back around. He said, I understand you're here with the interest in foster care. I said, that's right. He said, can I tell you something? I said, sure. He said, did you know that we make our decision on how many beds we will need in the prison system based on how many kids age out of foster care? And I just kind of went quiet. I said, what? He said, no, those kids, we've got the numbers. We can tell you how many of them are going to end up in our jails within 3 to 4 years. We can tell you how many of them are going to end up in a homeless scenario, how many of them are going, and he just went on and on. And these kids in the system were just being destroyed. They weren't being saved, a huge percentage, and they end up in the jail. When he said that, he looked at me then and said, if you'll do something about this, I would love you to put me out of business. He said a huge majority of the prisoners all across the state of Texas came through the foster system. If you fix it there, you fix it here. Well, I didn't even know how to respond to that, but it got my heart. It got me to see there's something. Then this other guy speaks up. He says, well, I'm the judge over family court. So all the family judges answer to me. Let me tell you a story. And he tells me a story about when he first became a family judge and he removed this child from this terrible situation. And he went home and said to his wife, I had a good day today. What I did today made a difference. It wasn't just being a judge or a lawyer. I saved a kid from terrible experiences and a terrible life. He said, you know what? I like doing this because it matters. He said, 18 years later, I'm removing a kid from a messed up circumstance and realize the mother I'm taking the kid from was the first girl that I removed that I thought I won a victory on. And all I did was remove her from one bad situation and put her into a broken system that is continuing to produce the same result. And he looked at me and said, if you can fix it, you can put me out of business. He said, you guys are at the headwaters of what's wrong with America. If you will fix it. So as boy, it got a hold of me, it motivated me. We're still trying to do something. Later on, as we were starting this, one of the things we discovered when people didn't want to be involved is if we would call the local family court judge, whoever does family law and deals with whoever removes the kids, whoever has that power, whoever that judge is in your community. If you would say, we want to do something to make a difference in foster care, and the first thing we'd like to do is be given permission to take 4 or 5 people and sit on the back row and sit through your court sessions and see what's going on in our community with people who live in our neighborhoods, what's happening to our kids. I'm telling you, when we would put a group of our church leaders in that environment, let them sit through that, by the time they left, they're asking me, what can we do? The motivation came from that moment of family court. So if you're out there trying to figure that out, I would say start by finding out who your family court judge is and making an arrangement and pulling your key influencers in your church or your district or whatever you may be leading, and let them set through what goes on in that court. And when it's over, have a meeting with the judge. See if you can take him to lunch. Let him tell you stories. Let him talk. Let him share with you ways he thinks you could help. And you'll end up involved in CASA. You'll end up with people involved in, I won't go into all those things. You probably know them, but I'd probably get off track if I did that. But many opportunities for your people to be involved and to connect with building a church that'll support it.
Right. Yeah, I've actually, again, guys, another starting point, to try to get pastors in your community, leaders in your community to see what's going on in these kids' lives, the abuse that's happening. Is he's talking about that clergy in court type concept where you, and it's really as easy as if it's open courts in your state. I mean, not every state or county is open court, but if it's open, that you can talk to your judges and befriend them and just say, hey, I'm a local leader in the community. I'm a pastor in the community. And I'm just wanting to see where I feel like God's wanting us to get involved with foster care. And I'm wanting to see what's going on. It does work. And I know with the COVID thing right now, it's definitely harder to do that. But when things open up, that's something you could do. Something else you heard him talking about was just some of you guys know that pipeline. Some of you, maybe it's the first time you're hearing it, that if we don't get kids out, either back to their families and the family get restored or reconciled to God or to each other, if we don't get them in good quality foster adopt families, or we don't get them as they're aging out, if we don't get them in those lanes right there, they're feeding human trafficking, prison system, homelessness, the drug problem. I mean, it's feeding all that stuff. And so you jump in wherever God's telling you to jump in, but let's just jump in and help these kiddos. So lots of large organization conversation we're having here. We also want to address some of the smaller organizations like churches, so you got networks of churches where when he and I were finished, it was 600 something churches we were trying to help serve and get involved there. Saw around 100 of them get involved. But of those 600, Pastor, who should do it? What church, size or shape or season of their life should get involved in this?
Great question. First of all, if you've got a family in your church that wants to do it, the church can support in a lot of ways. But there are also churches who they may be older. The average age of the church may be older. They may be more of a what we call respite care or grandparent support age, where they go through some training, but they're there so that when families who have the kids, they can drop those kids off and get a night away and have a break. Because when the foster system, you can't just call a babysitter. There's some rules and requirements. So you need to create that support. Some churches, just the average age of the church says most of these folks, they'd love to be grandparents. They just need to be brought into the system so that you could actually have two churches working together, where maybe the church with the younger age dynamic is going to be the ones where they live, but you've got to support. The other thing is that they can supply Christmas gifts. They can supply physical items that you need and help and become a financial support. So some churches would be financial, some would be physical, some would actually be relational in their support, and others would actually lead the families themselves. And in a larger church, you have a combination of all of that. You create what Eric will call the wraparound, that support system that wraps around every part of the process. And what happens when you have that wraparound, where it's done by multiple churches agreeing and working on it together, which is a healthy way to do it, that there's a lead and then there's a support, and there's people from all of those churches that feel that thing in their heart to do something to make a difference in the process. So you create that. When you have a good wraparound system, though, the families are more likely to stay engaged. When they go through the emotion of connecting to a child, loving the child, and then the family gets their act together and the child is allowed to go back to their family, and you have to turn loose of the child, it's emotional. It hurts because by now you care. By now they're already calling you mom and daddy. There's something beginning to happen, and it's a difficult moment. And we do our best to prepare people for that moment, but all of us believe ours is going to be different. We're going to end up being able to adopt, and then it doesn't happen. And then to have the support to come around you to help you in that transition, it makes a difference. And if we're not wore out by taking care of a difficult child that we never got a break from. There wasn't respite care. It cost us more than the state gave us financially to help do it. We don't have that support. When you put that support in place, it changes the dynamic. And when the whole church is involved and celebrating what you're doing, making a hero of the church planners, there's something about that that makes you go, I'm going back in. Give me the ball, coach. I know they tackled me and it hurt last time, but those people cheered for me. Give me the ball. I'm going to try it again. There's something that shifts in that. And so all of that. So you can get that from multiple churches or from a large enough church. So I think a small church needs to participate, even if it can't completely wrap around a family by itself. If there's a family in that church, if they're in a system, they'll still wrap around. And that's how I'd like to approach it.
Yeah, and so guys, I know you're hearing the story there, and if you catch it, he's saying not everybody's called to foster or adopt, but everybody's called to do something. So the ages in the church can all do something. The different church sizes, whether it's small church or church planning church, we've helped churches before they've even launched and opened their doors get this into the DNA of their culture before they've launched, to established churches, to large churches, rural, urban, suburban, it doesn't matter. Biblically, all are called to do something, and you're hearing them. Like, there's all these ideas. One of the things he said was the respite. You talk about, it's definitely something the grandmas and grandpas are seasoned adults. Now, are you a seasoned adult there, Pastor Rick? Because did you experience some respite?
So our son and his wife, they were fostering this darling little girl. You heard him say we have all boys. All our grandkids are boys. We were so excited when he brought a girl home. About 6 months into it, the girl's mother had another baby, and because of her drug use, they removed it. And he was a meth baby. So he had grown up he'd been developed in a womb of a girl that did a lot of meth, and it had messed her up pretty bad, messed the baby up. So the day they got the baby, it was in withdrawals and struggles and painful, and it was terrible. Well, they were doing worship for one of our missions entities. I think it was in Italy or somewhere. And they didn't want to, it was a good opportunity for them to just go love on a bunch of missionaries, and they didn't want to miss it. They pastor a church, they wanted to be a part of that. So we had become respite to these kids. So we kept them and we had fun with them, but then we ended up with them for a whole 10 days in a row. And during that 10 days, this little infant, he went into a real difficult time. We had to take him to emergency. They had to do a spinal tap on him. I cried over that kid. I wept over that boy. I wept over her. He couldn't sleep. I'd walk the floors with him at night. I'd sleep a little. Rita would get up and walk the floors. I laid on a couch and prayed over him and held him. He would sleep better if he was laying on my heart. I don't know if I can tell this story very good, but we fell in love with him and cared about him and wept over him, prayed. I still pray. I still call their names in prayer. Ultimately, though, they had an uncle to the daughter that was to their mother. That was a family that had it together. And because they always do their best to put the child back in a true family, connected people. And so they ended up agreeing to take the two kids. So Ryan and Lauren had to drive them over there and release them. It was quite a moment for all of us. The beauty of that story is Ryan and Lauren still go to their birthday parties, and they were still there for Christmas, and she still calls Ryan and Lauren's sons her brothers. And so but we wept through that and cared for that. And here's what I know. I know that the influence we wanted to have on those kids growing up, we don't have, but those kids will now be covered in prayer for their entire life. God will answer that prayer. And somehow those two kids are going to go to heaven when they die. I'm seeing to that. That's what I'm doing. We fell in love with them. So that was a part of our experience in respite. And we were also available for other respite with other people. Our travel schedule, we couldn't always say yes. And I guess at this point in Texas, I'm still licensed for respite care, but now I live in Missouri. That's all messed up. You're trying to figure that out.
Yeah. We figure that one out right there. Yeah, it was good to hear that story. And he's right. Pastor Rick's kiddos, Ryan and their family's still connected. And we just actually heard one of those catch-up stories recently too. and again, remember the topic here, leading an organization into orphan care. You just heard two like opposite sides of this, right? You heard the head of an organization meeting with the head of a county, the head of the state, and then you heard him weeping and praying and pacing around his house while respiting a child in his own arms. Pastor, we would say, we don't tell leaders of organizations, you have to foster and adopt, because that not everybody's called to do that. We get that. But how did it help you as leading an organization? How did it help you to see both sides of that?
Well, two ways. One's practical. I had to go through the same training everybody else went through. So I really understood the training process, and I understood what was expected, what you had to know. It helped me understand the laws. It helped me connect better with the system. So I became a part of the process in that sense. That was very helpful. It helped me then when I was talking to a church or a leader. I said, well, let me tell you how this works. I know I've lived through it. So that was important. On the emotional side, it helped me know the pain of releasing a child in the way the system works. It helped me know how to fall in love with a child that I don't get to keep. So I identify, I really have empathy for someone who's going through that same issue of transition. So it connected me. It also let me see firsthand how valuable it was. That, you know what, we probably won't end up going to their graduation someday. That may not happen. There's some things that may not happen. But I tell you what, I went and held that baby while they put a needle in his back, and he screamed and hollered and cried out. And I felt as much love for him as I would one of my own children. And I was there for him when I needed to be there for him. And we got kids all over America that need somebody there for them right now. And so what you're trying to do, and what I'm promoting where I go, is a system that makes room in the church for those kids, because this is where they need to be. My passion, I tell you this, and I tell it in other places when I go, I believe there's a revival coming to America. And I believe rather than the kids in foster care being in jail, they're going to be in pulpits. They're going to preach the powerful love of Jesus Christ and the work of redemption in a way that only they can tell the story. And they're going to be a part of what God's going to do in years to come. And some of our folks take it in those families with these kids. They're so messed up. They're so hurting. They're painful. They hurt people. And so they got to work through that, and they're living through it. But someday when that kid climbs in a pulpit and preaches the gospel of Jesus Christ and people come forward, that parent that went through that is going to say, it's worth every moment. It's worth every pain, as God begins to redeem this nation. I don't believe you can disconnect the coming revival from orphan care ministry. I believe they're directly connected to what God's going to do in the future of this nation.
Whew. We got deep there. That's good. It's real. And you can see how both sides are really helpful as a leader. Even you guys know, most of you know our story. We started getting involved in leading groups through it before we were personally even involved. And it was just the way God set it up. We have a lot of new team members that are going the other way. They're foster adopt parents, and through that, God's telling them to become missionaries and join our team and things. But it doesn't matter. We just do obedience. It's just whichever way God tells you to go there. And on the leader side, a couple of, I think, final questions as we kind of wrap this up here. How did you handle the costs? Like, ministry's not free, ministry costs money. So how did you handle that?
We begged for money. I don't know what else to tell you. It was, we didn't have it in our budget in the district to do this, and it cost a lot of money to get it off the ground. So we started doing something. We did some fundraisers, obviously. We looked for people who had a passion for it and would help support it. We just started building a support system. It wasn't there. It's true that different people will give to different things. So when you create an opportunity to give to this, there are people that haven't given to anything that'll do it. You also have people that already know how to give. And because they know how to give, they'll give to this also. And so there are two targets when we begin to raise the money: those who weren't givers, but when you talk this, all of a sudden they're willing to be, and those who knew how to give, and they would add this to their list. So we pulled in both of those and begin to try to build a support system for it and enable it. we did what we could do. And sometimes if you work with the right agency, they'll give you a little help. If you're helping train their leaders, if you're helping train workers and train churches, it's something they're paid to do. And if you do it on their behalf, sometimes you can get support out of them to help support your process. Don't ever think, if you had any thought that somehow the state money was going to become a real advantage to the district or the church and you're going to make money, give that up right now. It's going to be much easier for you to go forward if you don't think this is going to be a financial blessing. Don't even think in those terms. God's going to bless you financially, but he's going to do it through another door. This door is going to always cost you something, but if you'll give through this door, God will give through another door. That's his principle. That's how he works. He will pour into your lap. I believe in the blessing of God, but it's not going to probably come in through this way. So just understand, in the same way Peter began in his own strength, God had to work the miracle. Part of the miracle is the money. Part of the miracle is the money, and God's got a way. But just start and ask and see who responds.
I agree. Did you, when you're starting this and you're leading this organization, and maybe I'm still pulling you back to some of those first years, 8 years ago, memories, but did you experience resistance from any other leaders? And if so, how did you go about leading them to understand this call?
Anytime you do something you can't afford to do, there'll always be the conservative leadership that'll push back a little bit, not out of resistance to the will of God, but out of resistance to it not being inside the budget and it not being fiduciarily responsible in their opinion. And learning how to trust God comes natural to some people more than it does to others when it comes to risking what you already have to do something you're supposed to do but aren't doing yet. So anytime you lead out of faith, you're putting something at risk. And so there are those that were concerned. They were concerned. But this one wasn't hard because the Bible's so full of you have to do this. It's as much as go into all the world and preach the gospel. You can't separate missions or foster it off and adoption. You can't, they're the same. It's a part of the gospel of God. It's a part of what we do. We just hadn't been doing it. We've been in assemblies. We make a big deal and celebrate giving to mission for the gospel's sake, but we don't make a big deal and celebrate out of the other thing God told us to do, which this is pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father. So all I would say is, well, the Bible says this, what do you think we should do? And they'd say, well, I don't know. I don't have another plan. Well, why don't we do this plan? You come up with a better one and we'll see what God does. And so there are times when we felt the financial stress. I won't say we didn't, but God just kept supplying. We just kept moving, and it's still there today. I think I left the district to come here, and I think they still have to have faith to keep it going. I think they still need a miracle every year. I don't think that's changed. The other side, though, is God has blessed them in tremendous ways, and He is and will, and He's blessed us all. So there's a faith factor.
Yeah, always. Yeah, it's the core of who we are as believers. So, well, as we're kind of bringing this to a close, any final words of encouragement before I kind of give some next steps to everybody? Just, I don't know. Again, this is, you got probably some network leaders that are listening in. You got some church leaders listening in, but just any final thoughts to kind of encourage them as we close out here.
Yeah, I'm just going to say to you what Bishop Blake said to me. What would happen if you did it? What would happen if you took it on? What kind of difference could you make? And if you're not going to do it, who is? And you just got to kind of have a moment. Again, I didn't pray about it. I just, there was the Bible and we hadn't done it. And it was obvious we should, and somebody had a place to get us started. I'm saying the same thing to you. Bishop is not in this call. He's a great friend of ours still to this day and very important in this process. He's not on this call. Eric is. And Eric knows how to get you started. Eric is what Bishop was to me. And I'm just saying to you, if you're not going to do it, who is? And why wouldn't you do it? And what would happen if you did? What could God do? How many kids? What if you did something and in the next 10 years, 100 kids were redeemed from the system, saved, filled with the Holy Spirit, and half of them called into the ministry? What a difference would that make? Because you made the decision to take on this. And then what if that's supposed to happen, but nobody did on your end what needed to be done to give room for it? I'm not trying to put guilt on you. Maybe it sounds that way. I'm just simply asking you to ask yourself some hard questions and come up with the right answer. And then thank God we have Eric and all these years and somebody good to help us get started. God bless you.
Appreciate your kind words. And you
welcome.
asked that question, to the audience, what could happen? I don't know if you've heard this one, Pastor Rick, but this one's kind of exciting. One church out of the 600 that we've been serving, one church, the Oaks Church here in Red Oak, Texas, right down the road from our office. Since 2013, we moved down here in 2012. So since 2013, they've seen over 430 kids fostered in their church and 68 adoptions.
Wow. That's incredible.
It is incredible when a church catches the vision from the top down, when the organization over them caught the vision from the top down. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands. We're getting up to the thousands, and we've talked about that, getting into the thousands of kids that have been reached through this effort. Pastor Rick, there's no way we could have done it without you. I know God moved us. You gave us a platform. Bishop gave us some experience and relationship. Maybe I brought a little bit of non-gray to the conversation there, but between the three of us, God did some great stuff, and we do still work together in different ways. And we're honored to have you today. Erica, I know you might be scrambling for three things I thought of that would be some next steps for our viewers. If you haven't read Adopted for Life, Erica will probably put that book in the as a link here. Get on Amazon, Audible, Kindle, whatever. Adopted for Life, guys. It's the theology of what we're talking about. It's our adoption spiritually in the vertical part of the cross, that we don't deserve to be adopted and put into the family of God, but God chose us. The horizontal part is, now that we've been adopted, what do we do with that adoption? And so that book, it's a must read if you haven't read it yet. The next one, just to get somebody's attention, there's a video on YouTube called Removed. And these are just things that we encourage all leaders that we talk to read that book and to watch that video. The Removed video just shows the behind the scenes reenactment of what it's like for a child to be removed from their biological family, and how our heart needs to go out to the bio mom and dad and pray for them to get restored, to the case manager and worker, to the foster parent, to the child, obviously themselves, that our prayers and our heart goes to all those groups. And then the last thing I'd encourage you to do is to go to our website. The link that we're going to share with you is workshops.backyardorphans.org. workshops.backyardorphans.org. We have a full day workshop that Pastor Rick's talking about that we'd love to take your church through if you haven't done it already. We have some mini workshops that sometimes churches that grow and transition their staff need us to come back in and recast the vision with them, with the church, because we just are there to guide the church on what it means for their volunteers to get involved or their church staff to get involved. So there's a lot of information on our website about those that we offer. As Pastor Rick said, we are honored, we're ready, we're prepared. Even in the midst of crazy seasons, we've shifted some of our trainings to online to serve some of the churches who aren't able or ready to go in person yet. So whether it's in person or online, we're still moving forward. And here's why. One, the gospel tells it. Two, abuse is still happening. Kids are still getting abused, even though there's less reporting right now because of the less interaction with daycares and schools. Children are still getting abused. In fact, we've heard it said from some of our local team members that the abuse has just increased. The hospitals have more situations hitting the hospitals right now during shelter-in-place type season. So guys, the church is the solution. You've heard that through this entire phone call. We're ready to help you. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you, Pastor Rick, for joining us. God bless.